My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Time travel has been the subject of science fiction since H.G. Wells' novel The Time Machine was published in 1895. Is time travel possible, and are there those who have actually accomplished this? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, paranormal researcher and best-selling author Mike Ricksecker, says our ancestors left us clues to this that are just being rediscovered today. Mike Ricksecker has been featured on History Channel's Ancient Aliens and the Unexplained, Travel Channel's The Alaska Triangle, Discovery's Fright Club, Animal Planet's The Haunted, multiple series on Gaia TV, and much more. His books include A Walk in the Shadows and Alaska's Mysterious Triangle. His website is MikeRicksecker.com, and he joins me this week to discuss his latest book, Travels Through Time: Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Mike Ricksecker. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me today, Victor. I really appreciate it.
And Mike, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your research and your experience. And also thank you for your service with the United States Air Force. Thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for yours as well.
Thank you, sir. Let's begin with your early path and how it led to your interest in the paranormal and other mysteries.
Yeah, absolutely. So like many people, my path started with having an experience. And for me, I was about 8 years old and woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this tall, dark shadow standing in the corner of my room. And I had no idea about, anything much paranormal outside of Scooby-Doo at that point in time. I had no idea about shadow people, shadow entities, or anything like that. I just thought there was an intruder in the house trying to rob the place or something like that. Or even kill me. It's about where your mind goes to at that age. But fortunately, I'm still alive to tell the tale, which is great. And it did something unusual. It did get physical with me. It approached my bed. I'm trying to scream. Nothing's coming out of my mouth because I'm just too terrified. Leans over. I'm staring into this blank black face, and it grabbed me by the wrist, crossed my arms across my body, and then it ran down the hall, of all places, into a closet. By that point, I found my voice, found my legs, ran off screaming in my parents' bedroom. And, they're trying to console me, calm me down, trying to tell me I just had a bad dream. But I knew I hadn't had a bad dream. This was, very, very real. I was very awake for this whole thing. And that was the first incident I had with shadow entities. Didn't have another one until several years later when we moved to a new house, and I saw something else there that was a little bit different than that first one. This was more translucent, showed up a number of times, and would just get skittish and run off whenever you'd kind of turn and look at this thing. And my parents actually saw that one too, so they were able to affirm for me that, okay, I was not crazy. I was seeing these things. So these are like the first few incidents that really set me down this path of exploring the paranormal and supernatural.
You were fortunate because when I shared my experiences in the 1950s with my parents, I was labeled with an overactive imagination until certain things happened to establish that it wasn't my imagination.
Right.
So I'm glad you had that better experience. Your bio says you hold a degree in simulation programming. What is simulation programming, and how does this tie in with the subjects that you research and write about?
Yeah, that is, I have a bachelor's of science in simulation programming. So this is, basically computer programming, but my training and my degree was specifically toward artificial intelligence and programming for a simulation. And so when everybody, lately here, especially earlier this year, there was a lot of rancor about artificial intelligence is going to take over the world. You had guys like Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak warning us about Chat GPT and all this sort of thing, which I find rather ironic because Elon he co-founded OpenAI, which is who developed Chat GPT. So there's a bit of a some business play there. I'm quite familiar and versed in the subject. And where this has helped me when we look at the world as a potential simulation, we can kind of take ourselves outside of the box. And how does the universe look as a whole if we're looking at it from outside, and kind of almost like a top down sort of view? Because as a programmer, everything within the simulation that you're putting together, whether that's a flight simulator, a computer game, what have you, everything that is in that little universe, that little world, already currently exists. And so when somebody enters into that simulation, they run through it very linearly. But as the computer programmer, you can go in and out at any moment within that code that's there. So for my latest book, Travels Through Time, this is kind of the angle that I took on. Although I only have one chapter on the simulated universe, it actually permeates throughout the whole work.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the book. And before we discuss your new book, Travels Through Time, let's talk about a couple of your previous books. Let's start with A Walk in the Shadows, obviously inspired by your experiences as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely inspired by my experiences as a child. And, as a paranormal investigator years later, this was something that I experienced several more times on these investigations. I've been involved some way, shape, or form in that realm for about the last 30 years. And as I continued to investigate, worked with a number of different people, started giving presentations, this was a subject that I would talk about routinely. And I collected stories from all sorts of people from many different walks of life, all with very, very different experiences. And so I collected those stories, continued to research on my own as well, of course. Did some scientific research with that as well as some philosophical, ancient history research mixed in there, and came up with this book that I think tackles the shadow phenomena from a number of different angles. It gets into, what are the different kinds, the different characteristics that we see? People, of course, are very, very curious about sleep paralysis and how the shadow realm is related to that. What are these things really? Are they just human spirits that can't fully manifest as an apparition? Are they interdimensional beings? Are they extraterrestrials? Are they time travelers or time slips? So a lot of these different types of things really come into play.
And what did you basically conclude in that book?
Well, that's a good question, because in many ways, I leave it open, because people have so many different experiences. While one person may be dealing with a shadow entity that is, maybe it's their great aunt Trudy that is coming back to visit to deliver a message and what have you, is very, very different than the person who experiences a shadow being that may actually be an extraterrestrial, and they experience some sort of time loss with it. They're two very, very different experiences. So I lay out a lot of different information for a person to interpret their own personal experience.
I have to ask you, I recently interviewed Dr. Raymond Moody and Paul Perry on their book, Proof of Life After Life. And they've talked about a thing called the shared death experience, where a relative might have a visitation from someone who's about to cross over. Is that included in your shadow work?
In some ways, yes. There are a number of cases in which, a loved one will come and try to maybe help cross their loved one over. I know my grandfather had seen his own grandfather, whom he had actually never met or never recalled meeting as a child, that helped him with that process. And so sometimes these people appear to us as a full apparition. They look very, very human. Sometimes they show up as a light being. Sometimes they show up as a shadow. Our eyes only see into a very, very narrow band of light. So, depending on how that person emerges into our plane of existence is going to depend on how our light or our eyes interpret that light.
I was very close with my paternal grandfather, and when I was 7, I was in my room one day and I was reading or something, and I looked up and he was standing there, and I said, "Grandpa, where did you come from?" And he didn't say anything, just smiled and then sort of faded away. And I went into the living room of the house and said to my mother and father, "Grandpa was here." And they said, "Oh, you're imagining things again." And a couple of minutes later, the phone rang with word of his passing. So I have a direct
Yeah.
experience with that type of thing.
Yeah, and I've heard stories like that before. It's one of those where almost the loved one is giving a final goodbye, kind of paying their paying their visits. And my grandfather, my other grandfather on the other side, he hung around for a few years after he passed. He visited several of us within the family, and essentially what it was is he was waiting for my grandmother to finally pass. And when she did, nobody saw hide nor hair of him again, except for on occasion. I've had a dream visitation from them. I've heard from some others in the family that have experienced dream visitations from them as well. So, but no, like you had there after my grandmother passed, no more experiences of that nature.
That's wonderful. He was waiting for her, and when she passed, they went together. That's a beautiful
Yes.
story. Thank you. Thank you. The area known as the Alaska Triangle has been featured on several shows that feature you. Tell us about your book, Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, and the similarities and differences between the Alaska Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where people are very unfamiliar. Everybody's heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but when they hear, oh, there's an Alaska Triangle, there's a Dragon Triangle, there's a Bridgewater, these are new areas for them. But there are these power centers across the globe in which basically what's happening here is, the Earth's core, which is spinning molten iron, is creating a magnetic field, which is, very helpful for us because it protects our planet from the solar wind. And as it passes through different metals and minerals within the Earth's mantle, the crust, it creates different energy fields depending on what it's interacting with. And in these particular locations, Bermuda, Alaska, and so forth, they are creating these very, very energetic, magnetic areas that create a lot of different strange phenomena, whether it's missing people, supernatural paranormal activity, UFOs seem to be attracted to these locations. So a lot of that strange phenomena occurs. Now, some differences between Bermuda and Alaska. Of course, Bermuda is essentially almost all water. Alaska, you do have some water as well, but there's a lot of land that is mixed in here. So you have different types of things that are charging this area. Like with Alaska, you have volcanoes and seismic activity with the earthquakes there as well. So these are other types of energies that help to charge and enhance that area. So you end up with different types of reports there than Bermuda.
And in Alaska's Mysterious Triangle, obviously, plane disappearances also, correct?
Yes, and that's a similarity between the two areas. You will have those different disappearances with airplanes. Flight 19 down there in Bermuda is the by far the most famous, but you've had others as well. The Alaska Triangle, you've had the Boggs baggage disappearance in 1972, which was very, very high profile. Several military planes have gone missing. And in all these cases, people suspect some sort of portal activity may have occurred here. You've had Bruce Gernon down in the Bermuda Triangle report flying through what he called an electronic fog. And basically it engulfed him like a tunnel. And all of a sudden he had flown almost 100 miles in just a couple of minutes, which was unheard of for the small plane that he had. So, and I take this to another level in my work where, okay, fine, they passed through a portal, but where did that portal take them? Did it take them to another dimension? Did it take them to another point in time? So you take a place like Alaska, and if a large Douglas Skymaster airplane that went missing in 1950, if that had gone missing through a portal and shown up say 500 years ago, just throw an arbitrary number out there, what would the indigenous people of the area think of an airplane like that showing up? Because they would have no context of that whatsoever. But there would be this, very large object in the air with a wide wingspan and being very, very loud and thunderous. Is this where some of our Thunderbird legends come from? Are they some of these airplanes that have gone missing and passed through a portal to another point in time?
And speaking of portals, I've been blessed to travel out to Sedona, Arizona many times and had many wonderful experiences there. I know a lot of people, I've never been there, say Mount Shasta is similar to that. Do you have any of those in your books?
I've been to Sedona, which is, very, very fascinating area. The American Southwest it's a hotbed for that type of energy. A favorite location of mine is Chaco Canyon. I do include that in a couple of my books. As they talk about the star people coming down using portals into that area to help enlighten the people. So I do include some of the different stories like that.
I remember growing up in the late 1950s and early 1960s and being fascinated with science fiction and the work of H.G. Wells in particular. His book, The Time Machine, was one as a 10-year-old that I couldn't put down. What inspired your new book, Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory?
Well, like you, it took a work of fiction, but for me, it was the film Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour back in 1980. And I loved that movie as a kid. Just the idea that the character portrayed by Reeves, Richard, was able to will his consciousness back in time just absolutely fascinated me. And really, it was a meditative experience through which he did that. I didn't understand that at that age. But when I made that move when I was 13 years old, we had moved from Massachusetts back to where we originally came from in Ohio. I'd spent 10 years as a child in Massachusetts. So I was very, very homesick. And on the 1-year anniversary, I decided to go ahead and attempt what he did. I wanted to will myself back in time to go visit my friends and all of that. And so I attempted this one night in my bed. And I can't say that I traveled in time, but I did have an interesting experience in which, as I was lying there, I did get into some sort of meditative state, and I started feeling this, like undulating current, like I was riding waves. And then all of a sudden I felt a bit of electricity, and that spooked me. And I snapped out of the meditative state and not really understanding what had happened. And, years later, coming to find out that I was right on the verge of having an out of body experience. I was about to project. Now, would I have projected in time, or would I have just projected out of my body? I don't know. But taking that experience and then the experiences that I had as a paranormal investigator doing research on supernatural activity, it seemed to me that a lot of the type of events and type of phenomena that I had been experiencing, people had been experiencing within that field, may not be something spooky in nature, might not have been a ghost or a haunting, might have actually been some sort of time travel event. So this really inspired me to basically dive down that rabbit hole. And, years later, I now have this book.
The frontispiece of Travels Through Time features the ancient symbol of a serpent in a circle swallowing its tail. I believe it's pronounced the Ouroboros.
Correct.
Within the symbol in your book are the hands of a clock pointing, I think, to 3:35. What is the significance of the symbol and that time in particular?
That was pretty close. It's 3:33. And I'm glad you noticed that. I have a few little Easter eggs scattered throughout the book, and one of those is as you go through the different chapters, which I call cycles. Like chapter 1 points to 1 o'clock, chapter 2 points to 2 o'clock. So 3:33. That's paying homage to Nikola Tesla, who I do talk about throughout the book. He was always very, very fascinated with the number 3. But yeah, the Ouroboros to me is a very, very significant symbol. This is the symbol of constant renewal and recycling in a lot of different facets, whether that's life, could be the planet, the universe, and so forth. And where I've actually related to this, of all things, throughout this book, there's been several scientific experiments down in Antarctica in recent years, the Anita Project and the Ice Cube Project, in which the data that has come back from that, and this is a peer-reviewed scientific paper that was published in the Annals of Physics, is that the neutrino experiments that they were running, these are supposed to be coming from space. And, in fact, they even published here recently a map of the universe based on their neutrino experiments and testing these things coming from space. But they had detected many of these neutrinos working in a very strange fashion, in which they were actually coming up out of the Earth's surface without a source. And taking this data that they had, they interpreted this to mean that we had a possible parallel universe running in reverse time. So where this comes into play with the Ouroboros, now on the surface, that is a fascinating premise. But if you look at the symbol of the Ouroboros, there's basically two tracks. There's an outer track and an inner track. Basically the outer skin and the underbelly of the serpent. And again, this is a symbol of recycle and renewal. Well, if you have two universes running parallel to each other in reverse, and we basically superimpose that on top of the Ouroboros, you would have one of the tracks, say the outer track, running forward, the inner track, say the underbelly, running in reverse, and where they meet is where the head meets the tail. And so I believe this is an interpretation the ancients knew. They may not have known exactly what the Big Bang was, but they knew that there was a beginning to the universe and an end to the universe. And we talk about the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end, essentially being the same thing. And so I believe that our universe is cyclical, that when the universe ends, we will be reborn into another universe. So when people ask what was before our universe, well, the universe. What will come after it? Well, the universe, again, that constant recycle and renewal.
Absolutely. In fact, interesting, just not to the same vein, but my mom had passed in January of 2020. And after her passing, I had these visions of circles and rings that kept appearing in my head. And a poem came through me called Circles and Rings, if I may share that with you real quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. It
says, the path of great beauty in so many things, from atoms to galaxies, circles and rings, natural wisdom that dwells there within, from naught to 360, that magical spin. We circle each other in gravity's dance, as Gaia circles soul, the solar romance, as Luna circles us in life-giving motion, drawing the tides and inner emotion. And the age of the oak is found in its rings, as in woman and man and all living things. And when the rings stop and life comes to an end, we'll all circle back and dance once again.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I like that. And yeah, that harkens to basically everything we were just talking about. Yeah.
Absolutely. My guest is Mike Ricksecker. His new book travels through time inside the fourth dimension, time travel, and stack time theory. Mike, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find my work, MikeRicksecker.com. All my books are there. Also, ConnectedUniversePortal.com.
And we'll be back with more of Mike after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Mike Ricksecker. His new book travels through time, inside the fourth dimension, time travel, and stack time theory. Mike, from your research, what was the earliest documentation or mention of time travel among the ancients?
I'd have to go back to ancient Egypt. That's where, when we were talking about the Ouroboros, the first incarnation, at least that we know of, goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. It was on the burial shrine of King Tutankhamun. And we see the image over his head, but it was also over his feet. And of course, they've put it on here because they want their king to be reborn. But really, throughout their literature, you see this all the time. When we look at what we call the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is really the book of going forth by day. We've kind of named it the Book of the Dead over the years, but in these particular texts, and they're spells, but they also give a narrative. And in the Papyrus of Ani, which is one of these books, it's a narrative with Ani, who was a royal scribe, and his wife, and they're going through their afterlife journey. And you see interactions with, Atum, who was one of the gods of creation. And he's asking Atum, well, what would be the span of my life? And now he's already, in the afterlife. He has already physically died, but he's, asking what would the span of his life be? And Atum says, well, it would be millions on millions of years for millions and millions of years. And so he's, in this sense, layering time. And this is, one of the kind of pillars of my stacked time theory. So he's layering time in this regard. And then he continues to say that, the earth will be renewed, and I, Atum, will take the form of a serpent. So again, we see this symbolism of constant recycle of renewal and, coming back around to the beginning. So the end of becoming the beginning once again. So yeah, we see this all the way back in very, very ancient times.
What is the nature of time and the paradox of time travel?
Well, time doesn't really exist. It's a human construct to try to describe our reality and to try to keep track of our existence here. So we use it for different things, like keeping track of the seasons, when to plant the crops, when to show up at work on time so we don't upset our supervisors, this sort of thing. But really, it's our existence here in the fourth dimension. Our fourth dimension is actually time, and we're kind of, we use that analogy that we're in this river of time. Well, that's fine, but time in this sense would be the water that's running downstream. But the thing that is keeping all of that time together are actually the banks. If you were to actually remove the banks of the river, all that water would spill out and become a giant stagnant pond or lake, and then you could kind of move about at will. So it's, the question then becomes, what are the banks? What's holding all that in to keep this time? But all that water is actually all existent. So it's really your perspective on how you look at the universe. Another way to look at it is take a town that you may be driving through, and maybe you're driving 35 miles per hour. And as you're driving through, there's a couple of houses, there's a gas station, maybe a little shop. And let's say it takes you 10 minutes to drive through that town. Okay. So you have what we call a time relationship with that town. Well, now let's say another moment, you are actually in an airplane and you're flying over that town and you see it all at once. You see the houses, you see the gas station, you see the little shop. It's all right there. And so what had been a time relationship that you had with that town, you now have a relationship with it in space. And so really it's your perspective of looking at all of this. But really it's our experiences from the fourth dimension. And what's fascinating about that means that we as humans are multidimensional beings. So our physical body is a third is a third dimensional object, but our consciousness is fourth dimensional. So our fourth dimensional consciousness is housed inside this third dimensional body. So we're actually multidimensional beings.
You had mentioned Tesla before and his fascination with 333. What did the great minds like Einstein and Tesla think about the possibilities of time travel?
Yeah, just before his death in 1955, Einstein had stated that time was nothing but a stubbornly persistent illusion. Past, present, future. They're just all an illusion. And so this is one of our greatest minds, our greatest thinkers. Tesla was a man that was extremely ahead of his time. He's, when he was a young man in Serbia, he had talked about, he didn't use the term astral projection, but there were, the way he described it would essentially be astral projection. So he was doing this as a young man, and he was tapped into what many people would call the collective unconscious or the Akashic records. You call it eternal knowledge. And some of his ideas and concepts were way, way, way ahead of his time, that he was getting laughed at for some of these ideas he had for technology that we now have in our everyday lives today. So our great minds were definitely aware that there was something different about the way that our universe works than to the convention.
You had mentioned your stacked time theory. What is it, and why is it important to understanding everything we're talking about?
Now, with stacked time theory, what this is, when we're talking dimensions, first dimension being a line, second dimension being a plane, basically like a flat sheet, third dimension being an object, fourth dimension, our concept of time. You take the fifth dimension and beyond, there are up to 11 dimensions. Fifth dimension and beyond would actually see time as an entire object. It's all available to them. And so with that in mind, if you take where you're sitting right now, every moment that has happened, is happening, and will happen are all there concurrently, stacked up, like each moment is a photo within that stack. And we have these different occurrences that happen in which two of those moments, because everything is frequency, resonance, and vibration, two of those moments will resonate the same frequency for just a moment, and we'll get a glimpse of another moment in time. And what's fascinating about that is that whoever is on the other side of that glimpse will see us. So this may be, we would call that a time slip, but this may be where some of our ghosts and hauntings and things like that come into play. Because there are many occurrences in which people will report, I saw this woman in a Victorian dress, but she saw me and reacted to me as if I was real. So that's a moment where someone's looking into the past, and the past is looking into the future.
Talk more about time slip. What is the time slip?
Yeah, time slip. Kind of like I was explaining there, but here's a interesting example here. So many people are familiar with the Conjuring House in Harrisville, Rhode Island, but they know it from the movies. And what happened there, it was very, very different than the movie that was produced. But one of the most fascinating things that ever occurred there, and I'm very good friends with Andrea Perrin, the eldest daughter of these things that happened there over 10 years' time, back in the 1970s, is there was a evening she was up doing homework. Her mother had awoken and asked Andrea if she could put on a pot of coffee and kind of warm up the leftovers, and she went to do that. And Carolyn, sitting there in the parlor, looked out into the dining room, and all of a sudden there in the dining room morphed into existence a family out of the 1700s. So there was a woman there cooking over the hearth, and the fireplace at that point in time had been boarded up for 100 years, but there she was, cooking something. A couple of kids running around. There were two gentlemen sitting at a table, they had pewter steins, and they turned and they looked at Carolyn, and they noticed her. The one gentleman elbowed the other, pointed over her, and said, "Well, would you look at that?" Again, as if she was the ghost. And then the image faded away. So at that point in time, Carolyn was looking into the past, and those gentlemen in the 1700s were looking into the future. So two moments in time bleeding over into each other for just a moment, resonating at the same frequency so that one could see the other.
So you see this as an explanation for possibly some of the paranormal and supernatural phenomena we experience.
Absolutely. It doesn't answer all of them. A lot of people want just a, singular answer to, why does this phenomena happen? Why does that phenomena happen? And there are multiple answers for these things. So yeah, some of our paranormal activity is actually going to be some form of time slip. Now, again, there could be other explanations for it as well, depending on the circumstance. Each circumstance is going to have its own explanation.
Are you familiar with Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s Slaughterhouse-Five?
Yes, I've read that.
What do you think about his premise in there? Billy Pilgrim is unstuck in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would basically be somebody who is able to freely move up and down the stacks. And, for him, he wasn't able to control it. He was just, one moment he was, he's in a concentration camp, and another moment he's, off in the future with these alien beings. And yeah, so he was unable to control it. But that's essentially the premise here, that all these moments in time are happening concurrently. And in fact, those alien beings that he was able to interact with, they were from another dimension because they were able to see all time. They knew everything that was going to happen.
Do you have some examples of some ancient time slips?
Yeah, there are some older ones. Trying to find a time slip out of ancient Egypt. Now they had their Stargate technology and things like that. An older one that I do like to talk about is the famous German poet Goethe. And with this particular case, he was, and he recounted this in his work Dichtung und Wahrheit, or in English, it would be Poetry and Truth. And in this particular case, he was walking down the road toward Dressenheim, which is a town there in Germany. He was having an affair there with a young woman. And as he was walking down the road, he's just kind of lost in thought, kind of daydreaming, zoning out, as we say in today's lingo. And all of a sudden, he noticed off on the side of the road, the other side of the road, a gentleman walking the opposite direction in a gold-trimmed gray suit. And when he tried to get a better look at the guy, all of a sudden, the gentleman disappeared. He's like, oh, that was really strange. That was pretty unusual. He took note of it and just, continued on his way. What's he going to do? Guy completely disappeared. So a few years later, he's walking down that same road in the opposite direction, gets around the area where he had that experience, and looks down at himself and realizes, oh, wait a minute. I'm the gentleman, the gold-trimmed gray suit, because he was actually wearing that suit at that moment. And so it occurs to him that, yeah, he had actually seen himself a few years beforehand. So I believe, what happened here was and people chalk this up as a quote-unquote doppelganger experience. If you look up like top 20 doppelgangers on Google, you're going to find this story, but I don't think it was a doppelganger. It was not the kind of evil twin sort of thing. Really what this was some sort of time slip. And the catalyst, I believe, was the meditative state that he was in. When we are lost in thought, when we zone out, we have these experiences today. We'll be driving down a road, we'll be lost in thought, and we miss our turn, we miss our exit. But that is a type of meditative state. And I think that what had happened when he was in that slight bit of meditative state, that he had tuned into his frequency, that he had tuned into himself at that location at another moment in time, and saw for just a moment. And as he tried to divert his attention to get a better look at this guy walking down the road, it snapped that meditative state and then lost the vision of himself.
In the last 10 years or so, there have been presentations either on YouTube or on television programs or in print media of photographs with people who seem to be dressed inappropriately for the crowd that they're in, and explained perhaps as a time slip. Are you familiar with those?
I am. I include a few of those within the book. They're kind of interesting, like a time traveling hipster, and he is wearing some clothes and he's carrying objects that seem a little out of date for that era, and it's a legitimate photo. It came out of the Braylorn Museum, and it's one that just showed up in an image search, and he's wearing the wraparound sunglasses, which technically in the 1940s were available, but they were hard to come by. The camera that he was carrying, it was one type of portable camera that technically was available, but again, really hard to come by. The shirt looks like a silkscreen shirt. The skeptics will say that, it's looks like a shirt memorializing the Montreal Maroons, which was a hockey team in the 1920s. And I've looked through photos of the Montreal Maroons and what their uniforms looked like. And it's like, if this was one of their uniforms, they must have had some sort of alternate jersey that was never photographed, because just the colors were it's a black and white photo, but you can tell shades of colors. The colors would not have been right for it. So, it makes you wonder and scratch your head.
Do our dreams reflect the possibility of time travel?
Yeah, we can certainly access other points of time within our dreams. We go into different brainwave states while we are asleep. And, again, everything in the universe is here. All time is all concurrent. So that means all the knowledge of the universe is available to us. We mentioned before, in collective unconscious, Akashic records, all that information is available to us, as is all of time. So when we enter into these different brainwave states, we can access different points in time and get a glimpse of things that are happening in the future. So we can watch things play out in our dreams. And then we wake up, and it might be a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months later, whatever it may be. And then we're suddenly in that moment. Well, yeah, we had traveled there in time. Some of these just come up as little glimpses, like deja vu moments, in which, because sometimes when we dream, we wake up, oh, hey, that was a fascinating dream. You try to tell somebody about it, and you remember about 5 seconds of a much longer dream. We start to lose some of that. And so it ends up being like a deja vu moment for us later on. So, but yeah, that's definitely a type of time travel.
And it might also explain premonitions.
Yes, absolutely. Those premonitions. The premonition could be within a dream. You might get a glimpse of something in your mind while people have premonitions while they're doing the dishes.
Yeah.
So, so and see, even that in itself, when you get into those menial tasks, washing the dishes, mowing the lawn, it is a type of meditative state that we enter into, as slight as it may be, but that allows our mind to be able to travel in and out of those other moments in time.
My guest is Mike Ricksecker. His new book, Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Mike Ricksecker. We're talking about his brand new book, Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory. Mike, are there certain areas of the world that might be time travel hotspots?
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking earlier about the different triangle areas of the world, Bermuda, Alaska, and there are many other places like that around the world. Sedona, the American Southwest is another wonderful hotspot for this type of phenomena. And so, the ancients knew that there were these different areas. they were able to detect that energy, and that's why they built stone circles. That's why they built the pyramids and things like this on these locations, so they could harness that sort of power, whether it was for healing purposes, entering into altered states of consciousness, and I believe to open up portals, travel through time, travel the cosmos, so stargates, these sorts of things. I believe they were using these locations for that as well.
Those who've reported extraterrestrial abduction or contact often experience what they call a lost time experience. How does this fit in with our discussion?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are many, many people who have had that type of time loss. And this is something that has been going on really so apropos since the beginning of time. But you look at some of our ancient accounts or historic accounts of this type of phenomena, and while it may not have been in the context of extraterrestrials back then, we see it in the form of other beings. So like the fairies, when people would be abducted and taken into the fairy realm, and whenever they would finally return, they would have experienced some sort of time loss. Well, what's happening here when they go into that realm? Or like now, you're being abducted and taken to the mothership, or for lack of a better term. Well, really, that's some other dimensional plane. Well, okay, we were talking dimensions earlier. If they are taking somebody out of this dimension, the fourth dimension of time, and taking them to, could be fifth, sixth, seventh, there are other beings and entities that live within these other dimensions. Well, that's outside the scope of time as we know it. So therefore, yes, time would certainly work differently there, or may not even really work at all if it's beyond our scope of time. So somebody returning would definitely experience some sort of loss.
Talking about extraterrestrial abduction, extraterrestrials per se, and this whole concept of UAPs or UFOs, as an Air Force veteran and someone who's studied this, what's your take on these things?
These can be definitely a variety of different things. Some of them I do believe are physical craft that have traveled the cosmos. Now, did they use a Einstein-Rosen bridge or something to get here to be able to travel that great length rather than Newtonian physics? Possibly. I think that's certainly on the table. I don't know. You never know how long do some of these life forms actually live, because to travel hundreds of light years would be a very, very long time. Are some of them traveling interdimensionally? I certainly believe so. So that would play into our time loss that we were talking about a moment ago. Some people have postulated now that some of these craft that we see are not extraterrestrials at all, but are actually us as time travelers from another point in time in the future. And I'm okay with that idea, but I think we need to expand our minds on that a little bit more. Sure, it may be somebody from Earth in the future that has come back in time, and we're seeing this maybe device that they're using to be able to do that with. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's human. We are right now kind of right in the middle of the existence of our planet. Earth has been around 4.5 billion years. We're supposed to be around about another 5 until the sun becomes a red giant and engulfs the Earth. So we're in a unique time. We're right in the middle. But you have to think about this. 64 million years ago, the dinosaurs went extinct. To us, that's a very, very long time ago. And humans weren't really around back then. And that 64 million years, that is just over 1% of the entire lifespan of the Earth. So even though it was a very, very long time ago for us, it's nothing in comparison to the whole age of the Earth. So given that, 64 million years from now, another 1%, humans may not be around. So could very well be possible that maybe it's extraterrestrial, maybe it's another intelligent life form on Earth that grows and develops here, and over the course of time develops time travel technology, and yes, comes back, and we see that now. So yeah, it could be somebody from Earth that is a time traveler, but not necessarily human.
In science fiction, time travelers are admonished not to interfere with the past as it would alter the future. Do you think that this may have already happened?
I believe so. I think that's, when we talk about things like the Mandela effect, and a lot of examples of the Mandela effect that are out there are like branding. And I think some of that is certainly misremembered, but there are a lot of other interesting cases that have nothing to do with branding that people remember very, very differently than what is supposed to have happened. So I think what we're experiencing here is there is some sort of interference here with time travelers. And it may just be people think that they go back to do something malicious and change time and what have you. I think some of this is just simply, people going back, watching, observing, trying to understand what happened in the past. And they accidentally do something. They accidentally interfere, or maybe they touch something the wrong way or cross paths with somebody they weren't supposed to. And just that little bit, we talk about the butterfly effect. That little bit can start, a whole domino effect of things that lead up to an alternate future. So, I think this has certainly already happened, and that's why we have some of these different effects and other memories and things of this nature.
We talked about this briefly earlier. What about the idea? Is our universe a simulation?
I believe so. And in fact, we see that talked about in our ancient religions, even though they don't use the word simulation. You look at the idea of reincarnation. Well, I mean, what exactly is that? You come from some home world, for lack of a better term. You come down here, you live a life, you learn some lessons, you pass away, you go back up, and you start the whole cycle all over again. Well, that's essentially what you're doing in a computer program, no matter what it is, whether it's your desktop application, a flight simulator, driving simulator, a computer game. You're logging into it, you're using it for a while. A lot of these type of simulated environments, you're learning something and then you log back out. Even Christianity talks about, we're down here in this world preparing for another world beyond. They don't use the word simulation, but that's essentially what they're describing. And so given all that, it makes you, this is what I think of our possibilities of a simulated universe. Because a lot of people will relate it to a computer environment. And it's hard to get out of that mentality because that is our current context of it all. I believe it's something more organic and biological, that we don't really understand the technology behind it. We just relate it to the computer because that's our most current. But you look at a guy like, we talked Tesla earlier. Now, he basically developed our first drone 130 years ago, developed our first drone. They called it an automaton. And he went even further to talk about developing an automaton of himself, that it would look like, act like, respond like himself. So basically, he's talking about a robot with artificial intelligence. But this was, again, 130 years ago. He was thinking it was going to be gears and wheels and radio waves. He had no idea about the silicon microchip at all. That was developed after he had passed away. So he had the ideas at hand, but he had no idea of the technology that would actually make that happen. I think that's the same boat that we're in right now. Yes, we're in a simulation. We have the ideas of how that would work. We have all these wonderful movies talking about such a thing, but I don't think we really have a grasp on the type of technology that is really underlying it.
What would you like readers to take away from Travels Through Time?
What I want people to take away from it is really, I want people to question the nature of the universe. I want them to ask the questions, what is really at the heart of all this? Yeah, sure. Okay. Are we living in a simulation? What is time really to us? I want people to really, rather than sitting back and just, kind of being lackadaisical about the existence of the world. Okay, I'm here. No, ask the questions. How does all of this really work? What are we really experiencing? Why are we really here? The Travels Through Time is really more of a philosophical book. I mean, there's a lot of science in it, not too sciencey. There's a lot of metaphysics in it. It's not too metaphysical. it is at heart a philosophical book. I want people to ask their questions about our existence.
And maybe about loving and taking care of one another a little better than we've been doing up to this point.
Well, yes, that's certainly it. It's I always, and this is what I always tell people, because I'll get asked the question a lot, why do I do all of this? And I say that, well, I believe that we are here for, one, primarily, yes, to love each other and to help each other out. Two, to pass on to the next generation. So all of this knowledge that we're gaining, if we don't pass it on to the next generation, it's going to be lost. And then, humanity will keep going through all of these terrible cycles it likes to put itself through. But if we pass our information on to the next generation, and they have to be willing to take up the mantle too, that perhaps we can avoid some of these pitfalls and cycles that we get ourselves into and start some new, better cycles.
The wisdom of my guest, Mike Ricksecker, his new book, Travels Through Time, Inside the Fourth Dimension, Time Travel, and Stacked Time Theory. Mike, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your work.
Yeah, absolutely. My website is MikeRicksecker.com. You can find all of my books and links to other media that I have out there. Connected Universe Portal is my online learning site. And if people want to come out, meet me, get a signed book, I'm going to be at Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles in February. I'll be speaking on Travels Through Time there that Friday night.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience and wisdom.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.